In this video, I want to deal with a situation where I have many files that I need to work with and they follow the same structure. So in this case, I have 3 tables that are all structured as a table, and the first 3 columns are the same, but then the second table has an extra column and the third table has 2 extra columns. And because they follow the same structure, I want one function to deal with it. Because in reality, I wouldn't get them like this. I would get my files from a folder which will look this way. So I've faked having these tables in a folder, and this is the output you'd get if you were to load data from a folder. In other words, if my source was a folder, this is what it would look like. I'd have a file name and then the file, which is in a table. So this was just me being lazy and not wanting to create them. In the easy situation, all of my tables are structured as tables, meaning they already have predefined headers and there's no repetition of headers. In the hard situation, I don't have column headers. I have this column 1, column 2, column 3, and I have a repetition of my column headers. And this is something I get sometimes when I get SAP extractions, where I'll get a repetition of both the column headers and some null rows, and I want to be able to handle them. And likewise, in the hard situation, I have 3 columns in the first table, the same 3 columns in the second table, plus a fourth, and then in the third situation, I have the same 3 and the same fourth and an extra one. And likewise, I've gathered them in one query, which is what it would look like if I grabbed it from a folder. Meaning that my output will be that this acts as my source, and then I want to create a new query where I go in and grab TBL1 and then extract this table, and likewise TBL2 extract this table. Anytime you want to work with functions, you want to first go up and create a parameter. My parameter will reference the file name. I'll just call this file name easy, which is then going to TBL1. And I want to start with the first table for a reason that you'll see shortly, because it's going to give me a problem. So I want to put that here. And then I can create a new query where I don't want to grab the source file. I want to reference the all table. And I guess I can call this easy and this one hard. To begin with, I want to filter the file name based on my parameter, because my parameter will then be my source step in my following queries, which means I want to change this text to instead be file name easy, which means I've now already referenced a parameter, which will make things easy once I convert this query into a function. Now, the wrong way to handle this would be to simply click the extraction button and say I want to grab all columns, because what you'll see here is that it's hard-coded the columns from inside the table, and it's hard-coded what the new names will be. So I could change what the column should be here. But if I go back in here into my parameter and I change this to TBL2, then you'll notice that this extra column, nothing has happened to it. And I know that if I go back in here in my second table, I should have values for sales, and I'm not getting that. And I'm also not getting my fourth column. So I can add this here and say, where's the fourth column? And this is why this will be wrong. And I can then change my parameter back to TBL1. What I want to do instead is to use a function called the Table.ColumnNames, which will grab me all of the column names from this table. I can do that from filtered rows, and this is then a list. And it shouldn't be the filtered rows itself. I want to go into the table that is found within the file column and within the zeros. So I can say extract column headers. I want to go into the column called file. I think it was called file. Yeah. And then the 0th row. But this isn't a table, but this is. So now I'm saying go into the filtered rows table, go into the file column, grab me the value from the 0th row, which is then this table, which has 3 headers. And when I then change the parameter to be TBL2, I'll get 4 values. And at this point, I can then copy this function, the table expand table column, and then I can use some of the arguments. So table transform, no, it was expand table column. My table is then source, which in this case is a Danish word, and I want to pass in a list of column names, and that's exactly what I just got here from extract column headers. But then I also want to say I don't just want to expand Kile, I don't just want to expand, and actually that shouldn't be source, that should be filtered rows. And I don't just want to extract it because where am I getting the table from? I'm getting that from the column file. So I will add that here and then it'll extract it. And the nice thing is that this is functionally the same thing as just expanding it, which means I keep this file name column. And in this case, I do want to keep this because I can then append all of my output tables to create one giga table. And in my specific case, I do want that. I won't be doing that in the video, but I needed that in my work case. The only extra thing I want to do is that right now I have this empty row, but it's not really empty. It's not a null. So what I want to do is to find and replace. I want to act on all of my columns, and I want to replace nothing with null, but not nothing. I want the string value of nothing. This will again hardcode my column headers, and there's no need to do that because I can get that from extract column headers. And now I have fat, head, and null, which is what I want. And if I then change my parameter to TBL3, then I'll get this fifth column. And at that point, I can then right click and say I want to convert this into a function. I can call that func easy, and now I can test it out. So I can actually do it like this to invoke my function, and this will then be hard-coded like this. And I personally prefer having my source step where I'll write in TBL1. So I don't want to do it like this. I would instead say TBL1 as my source, and then my next step would be to call a function. I will then say I want to call func easy and pass it the argument of source. And then I can repeat that for 1, 2, and 3. And this is a way to handle varying amounts of columns or varying spellings. Because if it was called person, and here it was called persons, and here it was called salespeople, it wouldn't matter because it's not directly referring to the name. And that was the easy situation. The harder situation will require me to handle having this column headers be duplicated and also needing to raise the first row to be headers. As with all other functions, I want to start out with making a new parameter, which will then be called filename hard. And that should still be TBL1. Yeah, because it's still called TBL1 here. And I can then repeat what I did before. It's just to say I'm starting out by calling hard, just so I have something to work with, and I want to filter file name. But instead of that hard coding it, I'm referring to filename hard. And I can't delete the source step in here with the little X. I need to go into advanced editor. And I could also just copy the code, which actually would have been a lot faster than what I'm doing. But then you can at least see that there are multiple methods. Yeah, and of course it can refer to source because that's itself. But this is fine. And then I can repeat what I did before, which was to say go into the source table. Actually, I need that table column names first. Go into the table source, go into the column file, and go into row 0 and extract the column names from that table. Because the first row hasn't been raised to be headers, I get this ugly column 1, column 2, column 3, but that's fine. That's something I can deal with. And just as before, I'm still going to be using expand table column, which is then going to be source. My column is then what column of this table has my embedded table, which is still file. And my column names as list is this. So everything is the same as before. And this is where I have to deviate. And the method I've chosen is that before I raise headers, I want to extract the value of column 1, which is then always going to be this because I have the file name column. So I want to refer to this by name, not by index position. I could also refer to index position 1, but again, I'm choosing this method. And then I want to grab the value from the first row, which means I'm assuming you don't have any nulls in your first rows. Otherwise, you'd need to delete those. But you could do just by saying if we say not equal to answer, and instead I want to say not equal to null, just to say that this is definitely a situation you can have because SAP loves bullying me. And as I said, I want to extract this specific value. I want to say go into the remove null step, go into the column of column 1 and grab the value from the 0th row, which is then person. And then I can go back to the table, remove nulls. And what I want to do to this is to use first row as headers. And then I want to do what I should have done with the source step, which is remove nulls. I don't want that change type because that will also be fixed based on what columns you have. And I can't as easily manage that because if I have only 3 columns and I'm trying to change type on 4 columns, then it's going to fail. So I would do that in my output tables if I really wanted to. And I want to show then the wrong way to handle this because now I know that my first column is called person and I can say, I can just remove person. This would be fine if and only if I can guarantee that I will have a column called person and that then the values that gets repeated is person. But again, maybe it's called person, maybe it's called salespeople. I've seen that happen before in SAP where a column would change name. I don't want to use this method. Instead, I want to do something that requires a little visualization. So first of all, I don't want fixed filter because I'm actually skipping it. And what I want to do is I want to go into the Record.Field because again, a row is actually a record. I can say I want to go into this table, then I want to say the 0th row, and this step is just visualization. And then I can say I want to grab the field as text, but I'm not going into specifically the person. I can use this from first row, column 1 value, and then I need this here. It should not have been there. So that would be Denji, and then I can keep going, Kubeni, and then that should be person. So I use Record.Field to, just as I do here, go into a specific column. I can't use a variable instead of column 1, which I found out after painstaking attempts. So I can't in here say I want to use that if I try to copy this and say instead of column 1, I want that to be first row, column 1. It can't understand that because it wants me to pass in a literal text string, which would then be my column header. But I want that to be variable. That's why I need the Record.Field function. But going back, if I copy this, and then I say instead of each being this symbol, I'm instead saying that for each row I want to perform a function which will then give true or false. And that function is then if Record.Field. So I'm now going into, because I have the each keyword, I can use the underscore to get access to the current row, because table select rows iterates over rows. Now I'm saying go into the Record.Field of the current row, and I want you to go into the field, in other words, the column or the key. And what is that field? That's text, which means I can use a variable. So here I can say first row column 1 value. So now I'm saying go into the person column. So I would grab Denji, Kobeni, Asa, and so on. Now that I have this value, I then want to compare it and say, is this equal to then first row column 1 value, which in this case is always going to return person. And if this is true, then I want to return false, because then I want to remove it, and otherwise I want it to return true. And I could flip this around by simply saying, well, is the value in this column different from the column header? Then true. So this is just depending on how you want to phrase things. I'm saying if value in person column is different from the header. And then actually if I just go back, because now I had copied the fixed filter step, which means you couldn't see anything happening when I updated. So I'll go back to raised first headers. Now you'll see the person row disappearing. And I do want one last thing, because this is always going to return table 1. But if I change my parameter to be TBL2, then the column is now going to be called TBL2, because in this step I'm raising the first row to be the header. And this will then be variable, which means when I have 3 different tables, I'm going to have 3 different columns, and I don't want that. Which means I have one last step to do. And this I'm going to skip making this variable step and just do it in one go. So I'll be copying the code, and then I want to say I want to rename this column, and that's my table, and then renames as list. So I need to put this in curly brackets, and then I can say, well, I want to grab the column name from my previous step, which is also remove header rows. I guess it doesn't want to give me that remove header rows. And then I want to go into the 0th index, because this is going to give me a list as I showed up here in get column headers. And then I know that the file name column is always going to be the 0th index. And then what do I want to rename it to? Well, the new name should then be original table or file name. And then I need a parenthesis. So now no matter what, this will be called original table, even if I then make this tbl3. And again, I haven't done any type conversion, which you would have to do on your own. But I can now change this to be a function, which we call funcHard. And I can now apply it, which means I can just duplicate these. I guess I can't, maybe. No, I definitely can't, because then it's being annoying and duplicating the function. So I instead want to say this should be my source, which is just going to be tbl1. And then I can call the function. And because the function itself goes into this hard table, I don't have to do any specification here. Because in my work case, I only have this one table that grabs a massive table. But then I can simply call my function, which is then called funcHard, which takes source as argument. And then everything works the way I expected. And using a function is very nice when you're like me and you needed to do the same thing 14 times. You'll get tired very quickly. And like I said, in my specific situation, I then wanted to append these. You can then choose to append these if you want to, where I'm then saying I want table 1 hard and 2 hard and 3 hard. And depending on, well, your specifications, you'll want to do this. And because they have the same column header, Power Query understands that they should be appended together. This would have given me a lot of empty rows if I hadn't solved the original table column header. because then I would try to create a new column called table1 and another one called table2 and another one called table3, which I don't have this time. So that was everything. Yep.